I never thought that at the age of 68, when life was supposed to bring quiet evenings, gentle laughter, and the warm company of family, I would instead be staring at a letter that felt like a dagger piercing straight through my heart. It was a simple envelope, nothing fancy, with my name written on the front in hurried handwriting. The handwriting wasn't even hers, it looked like someone else had written it for her. But when I opened it, the words were hers, cruel and cold as winter frost. Greater than, I'll never see you again, but please send me $100,000. I read it again and again, my eyes wide in disbelief. The words blurred together. I thought maybe my failing eyesight was playing tricks on me, but no, it was there in black and white. Not only had my mother-in-law, who I once respected, trusted, and even financially supported for years, cut me off completely, but she had also demanded money as if I were nothing more than a bank to her. She refused to tell me her address. She refused to let me see my grandchildren. She refused even the dignity of a conversation. Just a demand. A cruel demand. $100,000. I sat down in the old wooden chair in my living room. The house was quiet, too quiet. My husband had passed away 5 years ago, and my son was working abroad, too busy with his own family to notice the silence that haunted my days. For years, I had tried to keep some bond with my in-laws, especially for the sake of my grandchildren. I used to send gifts, clothes, and sometimes money to help with their expenses. But now, this letter had stripped away the last illusions I held. I closed my eyes, memories flooding in. Memories of better days. I remembered the first time I met my mother-in-law, Evelyn. She was a tall woman, elegant in her manner, always with carefully styled hair and a smile that could disarm even the most suspicious stranger. Back then, I was a young bride, nervous and eager to please. She had welcomed me into the family with open arms, or at least, that's how it seemed. "Oh, we're so happy to have you," she said on the day of my wedding. "Your family now." Always remember that. For years, I believed her. I wanted so badly to believe her. Whenever my husband and I struggled financially in our younger years, she would offer advice, sometimes money, and always words of encouragement. When our children were born, she would come over to help, bringing casseroles and baby blankets, her perfume filling the air as she fussed over the little ones. I used to think we were close. I used to think she loved me like her own daughter. But perhaps I was blind. Perhaps I was just convenient. The distance grew. It started slowly. After my husband died, she began visiting less often. Calls became fewer. Excuses piled up. "We're busy with the children's school, we're traveling, we'll see you next holiday." At first, I understood. Life was busy. Families had their own struggles. But then came the restrictions. "You don't need to come to the house," she said once, almost sharply. "The children are busy. It's not a good time." I tried not to take it personally, but it hurt. Later, when I called to ask about visiting again, she simply said, "I think it's better if you don't. They're growing up, and we don't want them confused." Confused. By their grandmother. By me. That was the first knife. Still, I kept sending gifts. Birthday cards with money tucked inside. Holiday presents wrapped with care. Packages filled with clothes and toys. It was my way of saying, "I'm still here. I still care. I'm still family." But then came the letter. The shock. My hands trembled as I placed the letter on the table. I couldn't make sense of it. "I'll never see you again, but please send me $100,000. No explanation, no warmth, no love, just an ultimatum. A part of me wanted to believe she was joking. Another part wanted to believe maybe someone forced her to write it. But deep down, I knew, this was her true face. For years, she had used my kindness, my generosity, my loneliness. And now, when I had nothing left to give but my heart, she asked for money and gave nothing in return. I felt my chest tighten, a wave of bitterness rising in my throat. For the first time in my life, I realized, I was not family to her. I was never family, I was just convenient. Decision. I sat there for hours, staring at the wall, listening to the tick of the old grandfather clock. Time seemed heavy, suffocating. Finally, I whispered to myself, "No more." I folded the letter carefully, placed it back in the envelope, and tucked it into the drawer of my desk. I would keep it as a reminder, not of her, but of my own strength. I would not send her money. I would not chase her. I would not beg for scraps of affection. If she wanted to cut me off, so be it. But I would not let her take my dignity with her. From that day forward, I decided to stop sending money, stop calling, stop writing. She had chosen her path, and I would choose mine. It was the most painful decision I ever made, but also the most liberating. Alone but not broken. That evening, I brewed myself a cup of tea and sat by the window. The autumn leaves were falling, red and gold against the fading light. I thought about my grandchildren, their laughter, their little hands in mine, the stories I used to tell them. The ache of missing them was unbearable. But I also thought about myself. For too long, I had lived in the shadows of others, giving and giving, waiting for love that never truly came back. Maybe it was time I lived for myself. Maybe it was time I found a new chapter, even this late in life. I wiped my tears, straightened my back, and whispered, I am still here, I am still alive, and I will not let bitterness define me. The letter had shattered me, but from the pieces, I would rebuild. And little did I know, that decision would change everything. The night after the letter arrived, I barely slept. My mind twisted and turned with questions that had no answers. Why would she do this? Why cut me off so cruelly, like I had been nothing more than a stranger knocking at her door? At 3 in the morning, I got up, unable to bear the silence. I boiled water for tea, though I didn't really want to drink it. The steam rose, curling in the air like the ghost of all the conversations that would never be had. I opened the drawer again and took out the letter. The envelope was already worn at the edges from how many times I had handled it. I read the words once more. Greater than, I'll never see you again, but please send me $100,000. It didn't matter how many times I read it. The sting was always the same. Remembering the children, what hurt the most wasn't the demand for money. I had endured insults before. I had been taken advantage of before. Life had hardened me enough to withstand greed and selfishness. But the thought of never seeing my grandchildren again, that cut deeper than anything. I could still remember the first time I held little Daniel in my arms. He was barely minutes old, his tiny fingers curling around my pinky. I had cried then, overwhelmed by the miracle of life, by the bond that only a grandmother could feel. And Sarah, my sweet Sarah, when she was 4 years old, she used to run across the living room shouting, Grandma, Grandma, read me a story. She would climb into my lap with her favorite book, her curls tickling my chin as she leaned against me. Those children were part of my soul. They were the legacy I hoped to leave behind. Now, Evelyn had stolen them from me with one sentence. Conversations that never happened. I thought about the things I had wanted to share with them. I wanted to tell Daniel about how his grandfather used to love fishing, how he would sit by the lake for hours, teaching patience not by words but by silence. I wanted to teach Sarah how to bake apple pie, the way my mother taught me, with hands dusted in flour and the kitchen filled with laughter. I wanted to tell them about our family history, the stories of resilience and love that had carried us through wars, migrations, and hardships. But now, those stories would remain locked inside me. Who would carry them forward? Who would remember when I was gone? The loneliness of that thought pressed heavily on my chest. My son's distance. A part of me wondered, why hadn't my own son intervened? He knew how much his children meant to me. He knew how often I sacrificed, how I would send money even when my own bills were late, just so the kids could have new clothes or school supplies. But he lived abroad, always busy, always distracted. Our calls were short and polite. How are you, Mom? Everything okay? I'll call again soon. Soon rarely came. Did he know his mother-in-law was keeping his children away from me? Did he agree with her? Or was he too weary of conflict to say anything? I wanted to ask him, but the fear of his silence was worse than the truth. If he had chosen to side with her, I wasn't sure I could bear it. So I stayed quiet. A neighbor's kindness. That morning, as the sun rose, I heard a knock on the door. It was Margaret, my neighbor of nearly 30 years. She was carrying a basket of muffins, her kind smile softening the heaviness in my heart. Morning, dear, she said. I baked too many again. Thought you might like some. I invited her in, grateful for the company. We sat at the kitchen table, sipping tea, eating muffins. I tried to smile, but Margaret's eyes were sharp. She had always been the kind of woman who could see through walls. You look troubled, she said gently. For a moment, I thought about brushing it off. But the words poured out of me like water from a broken dam. I told her about the letter, about Evelyn's demand, about the threat of never seeing my grandchildren again. Margaret listened quietly, nodding from time to time, her hands folded neatly in her lap. When I finished, she reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "Oh, love," she said softly. "I'm so sorry. Some people, they use family like a weapon. And you've got such a big heart. That's why it hurts so much." Her words brought tears to my eyes, but they also brought a strange comfort. For the first time since the letter arrived, I didn't feel completely alone. The strength to refuse. Margaret's presence gave me clarity. "I've decided," I said, my voice firmer than I expected. "I'm not sending her a penny. Not this time. She can't control me anymore." Margaret nodded approvingly. "Good. You've given enough. More than enough. It's time you start giving to yourself." That phrase stuck with me, giving to yourself. When was the last time I had done that? When was the last time I bought something just because it made me happy, or took a trip just because I wanted to? For years, my life had revolved around others, my husband, my son, my grandchildren, Evelyn. Always giving, always sacrificing. But now, maybe it was time to live differently. An unexpected call. That evening, the phone rang. My heart leapt when I saw my son's number on the screen. Maybe he had sensed something. Maybe he had finally decided to check in. "Hello, dear," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Hi, Mom," he said, his tone casual. "How are you?" We exchanged small talk at first. He asked about my health, the weather, the garden. I wanted so desperately to tell him about the letter, but fear held me back. What if he already knew? What if he agreed with her? Finally, I couldn't contain it. "Have you spoken to your mother-in-law recently?" I asked carefully. There was a pause. Yes, sometimes." "Why?" I hesitated. "She sent me a message. She said she doesn't want me to see the children anymore." Another pause, longer this time. "Mom, it's complicated." Those words sliced through me. Complicated. That meant he knew. That meant he had allowed this. "Complicated," I whispered, my throat tight. "They're my grandchildren. Mom, please, I don't want to argue. Things are difficult here. Just give us some space, okay?" And just like that, he was gone. The depth of betrayal. I sat in the silence after the call, my heart breaking in a way I hadn't thought possible. My own son, my flesh and blood, was letting this happen. I had given him everything. I had raised him with love, worked long hours to put him through school, sacrificed so he could have a better future. And now, when all I asked for was a place in his family's life, I was shut out. The betrayal was deeper than anything Evelyn could have written. That night, I cried until my chest ached. I cried not just for myself, but for the years wasted on people who saw me only as useful when I had something to give. But even through the tears, I remembered my promise to myself. No more begging, no more money, no more humiliation. If they wanted to cut me out, I would let them. But I would not let them destroy me. I was still alive, and I had more living to do. The following week was the hardest. Every morning, I woke up with a heaviness pressing on my chest, as if a shadow followed me everywhere I went. The letter still sat in my desk drawer, and though I tried not to, I found myself opening it again and again, rereading those cruel words. Greater than, "I'll never see you again, but please send me $100,000. It was as if the sentence had carved itself into my very bones. But alongside the grief, something else had started to stir inside me. Anger, not the kind that explodes loudly, but the slow-burning kind that hardens into determination. I was 68 years old. I had spent my entire life giving. Giving to my husband, giving to my son, giving to Evelyn, giving to the grandchildren who may now never know me. And what had it left me with? Loneliness, silence, a demand for money instead of love. I refused to let the last chapter of my life be written by their cruelty. If I was going to live out my remaining years, I would live them for myself. The garden. I began spending more time in the garden. It had been months since I'd really tended to it. The weeds had grown tall, and the rose bushes drooped as if they too had been abandoned. But as I pulled weeds, pruned branches, and dug my hands into the soil, I felt a small flicker of peace return. There was something healing about the earth. It didn't judge, it didn't betray, it simply gave back whatever you gave to it. I remembered how my husband used to tease me about my obsession with roses. "You're more patient with those plants than with me," he'd laugh. And I would swat his arm, pretending to be annoyed, though secretly, I loved that he noticed. Now, as I knelt in the dirt, I whispered to the roses as if they were old friends. "It's just us now," I said softly. "But that's enough." For the first time in weeks, I felt a small smile on my lips. Rediscovering old passions. Margaret came by again one afternoon and found me kneeling in the garden with dirt on my face. "Well, look at you," she said with a grin. "I haven't seen you this alive in ages." I laughed, embarrassed. "I suppose I needed something to keep me busy." She tilted her head thoughtfully. "You know, the community center is starting up some classes next month. Painting, writing, even dance. Maybe you should join one. It'd do you good to be around people again." At first, I wanted to decline. I had grown so used to solitude that the idea of joining a class felt almost foreign. But that night, as I sat alone at the kitchen table, I thought about it more seriously. What harm could it do? I had always loved painting when I was younger. Back when my children were small, I used to sit them at the table with paper and crayons while I painted beside them. But then life got busy, money got tight, and the paints were packed away, forgotten. Maybe it was time to pick up the brush again. The painting class. The following week, I walked into the community center with nervous steps. The smell of fresh paint and the chatter of voices filled the air. A dozen people, most around my age, sat at easels arranged in a circle. The instructor, a cheerful woman named Clara, greeted me warmly. "Welcome, just find a spot anywhere you like." I settled into a chair, my heart racing. It felt strange, like being a student again after so many years. Clara passed out brushes and paints, encouraging us to paint whatever came to mind. At first, my hand shook. I didn't know where to begin. But slowly, the brush found its rhythm. Strokes of blue and green filled the canvas, and before I knew it, I was painting a garden, my garden, full of roses in bloom. As I painted, I felt something I hadn't felt in years: freedom. There were no demands here, no cruel letters, no manipulative voices. Just color, light, and the quiet joy of creating. When I stepped back at the end of class, Clara smiled at my work. "You've got talent," she said kindly. "You should keep going." For the first time since the betrayal, I felt proud of myself. Letters unsent. That night, after painting, I sat at my desk and took out some stationery. I began to write letters to my grandchildren, not to send, but to keep. "Dear Daniel," I wrote, "today I painted roses. They reminded me of you, because you always used to pick flowers for me when you were little. I hope you still remember that. Dear Sarah," I wrote in another, "I wish I could bake with you again. I hope you're learning to cook, and I hope you laugh as much as you did when we used to play in the kitchen." Each letter was like a balm on my heart. I knew they might never read them, but writing gave me a way to keep them close, at least in spirit. A shift in perspective. Weeks passed. Slowly, I began to feel lighter. I still missed them, of course. The ache never fully left. But I was no longer drowning in it. Instead, I was finding small joys: painting, gardening, even chatting with Margaret over tea. I realized something important. My worth wasn't defined by whether or not Evelyn allowed me to see the children. My value wasn't measured by the money I gave or the sacrifices I made. I was still a woman with dreams, with talents, with years ahead of her. And I deserved to live those years fully. A letter returned. One morning, as I was watering the roses, I noticed an envelope sticking out of my mailbox. My stomach tightened when I saw the handwriting. It was hers again, Evelyn's. My hands shook as I opened it, bracing myself for more cruelty. Inside was a single sentence. Greater than, "If you change your mind, the money will still be welcome." No apology, no explanation, just greed. But this time, I didn't feel crushed. I didn't feel broken. I felt strong. I tore the letter into pieces, dropped them into the trash, and whispered to myself, "Never again." It was the first time I truly understood that I was free.